At number 13, we're going to have Millard Fillmore. Again, let's look at the criteria: growth, finances, international politics, war and security, and the most important criteria: did they leave the country better or worse than they found it? Fillmore came in after Taylor's death and got rid of the entire cabinet. He wanted to have a fresh start. And when I talked about the compromise of 1850 not really being on Taylor's ledger, but being something that he kind of pushed toward, or at least was guiding in a direction, I hope that I was clear, and maybe I wasn't in that video, that I'm not giving a responsibility because I don't think the Compromise of 1850 would have looked anything like it actually did had Taylor remained president. Taylor had made clear he wanted to sign, or was willing to sign at least, the Wilmot Proviso, which would have made slavery illegal in the federal territories. He didn't believe in the expansion of territory to the new states, even though he himself was a slave owner. He did not believe in the expansion of it. He understood that this was all going to push towards something that needed to be resolved. And I think he was intent on having an actual resolution of this issue. And I think there would have had been some compromise met, but I don't think it would have been along the same lines. I don't think he would have agreed to what the kind of baseline that created the ability to have the Kansas-Nebraska Act later that was really just set everything on fire. I think he would have called the Texans either bluff or had the fight over New Mexico and their wish to expand in that territory, and they're trying to leverage that as a blackmail to force them to do the Missouri Compromise extended all the way to the Pacific Ocean. I think he would have just said, slavery exists in the South. I'm a slave owner. I get it. But no, you don't get to have the whole country be slave. We're not doing that. Part of the states' rights is also the states' rights to not have to follow the rules of slavery. Part of the states' rights is also not having to follow and engage in the Fugitive Slave Act if they don't. I think he was an actual states' rights person. I don't think he was a person who was a slavery at all costs person, which is what the South really was and what the Confederacy was really about. And we'll get there when we get there. Fillmore was not that person. Fillmore was very weak and easily Fillmore didn't make any decisions. He kicked everything down the line. He was willing to make unreasonable compromises, not thinking about any long-term plans. And he just did a horrible job, quite frankly. In terms of growth, yes, technically, I think California came under his watch, and with the Missouri Compromise, you can make some argument, but like nothing that he did grew the country in any significant way, and everything he did kind of left the country in a more dangerous and precarious situation, even down to the appointment of Brigham Young in Utah, basically allowing that area to become an ethno-state, which I think I believe the Utah war was only like 4 years right after he left the presidency. We have a war with Utah because we allowed an ethno state without establishing any federal control or what the ground rules are. I don't think Taylor would have done that. I don't think Taylor would have, I think Taylor understood, not so much as a full federalist, but understood the federal government has to be in charge. Decisions have to be made. We can't just push things down the line. Yes, he would like Congress to make the decision, but he was kind of pushing Congress to make the decision. He was not going to accept a compromise that didn't address the issues directly, even if it made somebody mad. He wanted clear lines drawn. He wanted this to be the opportunity where we made those decisions, whereas Fillmore just pushed everything down the line, made it worse. And I think maybe if Taylor had been able to do this, maybe the Civil War starts now. People will argue, well, if Taylor had stayed on and Fillmore hadn't made the compromises that he made, maybe the Civil War happens now. I kind of tend to look at this as this was a transition point potentially. Calhoun had just died. I think he died in March of 1850. Clay was sick and would die 2 years later in 52. Even though he's given credit as being the great compromiser who came up with this agreement, the old guard was dying. We were ready to transition to a new group of people. In fact, Franklin Pierce coming in was a young president. This was a time where there was an opportunity to transition. After the passage of the Compromise of 1850 and the next round of elections, in the South, a lot of Unionists won in the way they were describing Unionists as people who wanted to stay in the Union because there was a push for secessionism. I think had the Compromise of 1850 been less agreeable but more final, something to the effect of, yes, we're going to agree that these new states are not going to be slave states, but we'll put something in writing where the southern states' right to keep slaves will be enshrined. Maybe even I don't think it would have constitutional amendment, but something like that to that effect. I think that's what Taylor would have negotiated. Not necessarily a good thing that extends slavery, but perhaps that the Civil War could have been avoided or delayed. We'll never know. What we do know is Fillmore didn't do any of those things. Fillmore basically agreed to a compromise that was, and the Congress also agreed to a compromise that forced the North to accept Fugitive Slave Act provisions, forced them to accept slave catchers coming into their territory, something that basically made it impossible for Fillmore to run for re-election, while also making the South upset because they had all these ambitions and dreams about their version of manifest destiny, including expanding slavery all the way out west, including basically taking over Cuba. He didn't take care of any of those things. In terms of finances, I'm going to put him at fairly neutral. He did invest in infrastructure, but not very much, and he was only there for 2 years. And his Congress just kind of walked all over him, which we'll get to, I guess, when we get to other things. International politics, this is okay, I guess. Apparently, he convinced the French to not take over Hawaii, and he made some overtures to opening up Japan to trade, which are all whatever. They're fine. None of those are major significant changes that I would say were on his watch that he gets major credit for. So I'm going to put him at neutral to not particularly bad. War and security, he made everything worse. The country was less secure because of this compromise. The country was now really on a rocket sled towards civil war. He did not resolve the problem. He set the groundwork that would create bleeding Kansas and all the other problems we're going to have going over and discussing with the future presidents. And he did that by just being weak and unable to make decisions and afraid to make anything final. Very pathetic presidency in that regard. And I think he absolutely left the country worse than he found it as a result. So I'm going to put Millard Fillmore at, let's see, 11th. I'm going to put him above Henry Harrison and Talyor because I do think that they were worse. I'm actually going to put him behind Jackson and Van Buren because although Jackson and Van Buren started this train, I would argue, and they are going to be ranked very low as a whole. I think because I think that the path that led us down towards civil war started with Jackson. A lot of the ideas that Jackson put in place that led to the collapsed economy that Van Buren inherited, all of that starts there. But Fillmore could have turned the train, or did nothing to turn the train, and also did nothing positive in other regards. There are things you can give Jackson credit for and Van Buren credit for. There are very few things. As I was going through the list, I'm like, what did Fillmore accomplish? I don't think he accomplished anything of significance, but he did set the framework for the complete collapse of the United States, going towards civil war. When he had been handed something with regards to, again, Polk handed a stabilizing country to Taylor. Taylor was basically making clear, okay, there's still a lot of stuff we got to work out, but the plan going forward is if you want to fight, we're going to fight. We're going to set clear boundaries and lines. And then Fillmore was like, I don't really want to do this, and everything fell apart. So that's Millard Fillmore, number 11.